Consider supporting the work of Notes from an Aspiring Humanitarian by becoming a monthly patron. Your contributions will help keep the resource alive and support its mission. Visit patreon.com/NAHblog to learn more and make a contribution of $3, $5, $10, or $20 per month. Again, that's patreon.com/NAHblog. You can start or stop anytime. Thank you for listening. Welcome to the Notes from an Aspiring Humanitarian podcast. I'm your host, Relando Tompkins-Jones. I'm a social worker, social justice educator, writer, organizational consultant, and now podcaster who works to build more equitable and inclusive communities. I am also an aspiring humanitarian. My experiences have shown me that in the process of working for social justice outwardly, it's also important for us to continue to critically examine ourselves, shedding attitudes and behaviors that are oppressive to make room for those that are more inclusive, just, and humanitarian. What is an aspiring humanitarian, you ask? When I say humanitarian, I don't mean humanitarian in the harmful sense of placing ourselves in the role of a benevolent hero who's there to swoop in and save others. I mean dedicating one's life, time, and energy to honoring the ways that our destinies are intertwined. It's about accepting the lifelong pursuit to become more humane to those around us, with the recognition that we lose important parts of our humanity when we allow and enable the suffering of others. It means acknowledging our many contradictions and complications and aspiring to do more, aspiring to do better. It means acknowledging that systems of oppression exist by design and not by accident, and working towards an individual and collective transformation that includes an unshakable belief that our society's safety, viability, survival, and ability to thrive is only as secure as our most marginalized community members. Since 2011, my blog, Notes from an Aspiring Humanitarian, has been a place where I've written and curated content on issues of equity and social justice. Through using written word, film, and video, and other forms of media for social justice education, I hope to continue to expand and enrich the narratives about social issues that face our society and to find ways to take action while encouraging others to do the same. Today, the blog and now the podcast is for others who share a passion for that same journey. No matter who you are, where you come from, what your identities are, or what area of work you're in, there's room enough for all of us in this work, and I hope that engaging with the podcast or the blog can move you closer to discovering or reaffirming your answers to the questions that you may have about how you can best be of service. Thank you for choosing the Notes from an Aspiring Humanitarian podcast. I'm your host, Relando Tompkins-Jones. Occasionally in my work, I am asked to share my thoughts about the importance of establishing community agreements in social justice work, particularly as it relates to the power of storytelling from our lived experiences and addressing power dynamics in group settings. As I talk about that a bit this week, leaning on my training and experiences with facilitating intergroup dialogue, I'll also share some examples of community agreements that I've found helpful with the message that community agreements are meant to be liberatory. They're intended to open communication instead of limiting it. A key question to ask yourself as a facilitator or a participant in co-creating these agreements can be, what elements need to be in place for me to show up authentically in this space? What needs to be here for me to be able to show up authentically in this space? While data and statistics have their place, speaking from a personal experience is a crucial element in intergroup dialogue. It is through the sharing of our personal experiences, even though they may be different from others' experiences, that gives us the opportunity to gain valuable context into what led them to their current worldviews, a deeper understanding of our own worldview after listening and reflecting, and at times, an improved sense of connection among other outcomes. Still, one of the hardest shifts for me to make during my initial introduction to intergroup dialogue and my later training as a facilitator was moving from speaking from my head to speaking from the heart. For me, I learned during that process that it was a defense mechanism, particularly speaking from the head, It was a defense mechanism that I developed in response to feeling pushed against a wall during attempts to speak from the heart about my experiences with racism, only to be met with invalidation and silencing tactics. Having a lot of life experiences that taught me that being righteously angry about the impact of my marginalization and then trying to talk about it, bringing those emotions into it, would lessen the impact of my argument. Also, adding the further complication of acknowledging the ways that I'm marginalized due to my Blackness and not having those opportunities to really be emotional, to really be and display the legitimate anger that I experienced. So that's an additional layer there. So, reinforced again and again, I'd internalize the message that my honest and personal story wasn't valid enough. So I became very intellectual, and I'm saying that in quotation marks. I armored up by developing my vocabulary and becoming very skilled at knowing and firing off important statistics with this idea that since folks won't listen to my lived experience, I was determined to provide the data that they couldn't deny. I'd become accustomed to debate instead of dialogue. And perhaps in a later episode, we'll go deeper into those differences between what is debate and what is dialogue. But for the time being, I'll just share those in the show notes of this episode. But for me, really experiencing dialogue, really internalizing the fact that I am a teacher and a learner, that I have things to contribute as well as things to learn, listening to others with everything that I have and being listened to in return and met with validation. In addition, having my own emotions acknowledged and affirmed without having my tone policed, having my own thinking changed as a result of considering others' experiencings, and knowing that my sharing influenced their thinking really showed me the power that comes with storytelling and sharing our personal stories as we have experienced them without a filter, without editing, without any sort of limitations on our lived experiences. So I just found the power in that, sharing my personal story, having it validated, not having oppression explained away. Found some real power in that. And I also found some transformation in sharing my own personal story, listening to others as well, and hearing the different ways that even when it comes to thinking of the ways that I'm privileged in relation to other people, being able to hear and listen to those lived experiences. And from that perspective, without a filter, without limitation, was crucial and really instrumental in my own development as well when it comes to not only having that catharsis and the validation that's necessary for working towards liberation, but then also thinking about the ways in which we're implicated. We need to recognize those ways too and learn from that and grow in that and take action in those areas too. And dialogue was a big part of that. So while I've become much better at sharing the personal stories in the years that followed, heady communication as a defense mechanism hasn't gone away from me completely. I'm just better able to recognize it, to slow down, and get back on track. And everybody's different. So for me, when it comes to dialogue, that was one of the things that I learned initially. One of the things I really struggled with when it came to really understanding it and participating in it fully. This wonder about, will I really be heard? In my continued work with dialogue, I've noticed the same difficulty with some participants and facilitators in training with making the shift to leading with the heart. Many of us are accustomed to debate, feeling pushed against a wall and feeling the need to push back in return. And at times, that dynamic is brought into dialogic spaces. But dialogue cannot be had unless we, as facilitators, can co create the space with participants, co creating those conditions that are conducive to dialogue. So, one way to co create that space is through the establishment of community agreements. In dialogue, community agreements are meant to be liberatory. At times, I've also heard them termed ground rules or just agreements. And there are some differences there. So, ground rules in a traditional sense can be used as a way to establish group norms, to decide to try to establish a sense of safety in the group, as well as at times to control the conversation in a traditional sense. But with dialogue, community agreements, you can consider those as a list of conditions for liberation. They're intended to open authentic and radically candid communication instead of limiting it. So, when co creating them with participants, it's important to consider it as an exercise in discovering what elements need to be in this space for us to show up as our true selves and maintain the bravery it takes to do that throughout. So, that's a really important question as you're thinking of these and going through them. It's really important to consider what elements need to be in the space for us to show up as our true selves and maintain the bravery it takes to do that throughout our time together. Depending on what's happening, I'll have some prepared before we meet that I'll share in hopes to get feedback and any additions that might need to be added, any changes made. Other times we'll start from scratch and build them collectively together, depending on time and other factors. However, no matter where you begin with them, collective participation is key to that process. It's so important that collective participation, opportunity, and feedback is embedded into the establishment of those community agreements. So it's not an exhaustive list, but I do have some that I've found useful in my own journey. But before I do that, I often share in my work some acknowledgments that go towards acknowledging just power dynamics and setting the context that we're in. So I have four acknowledgments right now in mind. And these four acknowledgments were adapted from those created by Dr. Ruby Beal at the University of Michigan, now at Hampton University. But these are acknowledgments that I learned and have kept with me since my days as a social work graduate student learning intergroup dialogue facilitation from the program on intergroup relations. Many years ago, they've still stayed with me. And I often use these in my work and practice to set context and tone. So here we go. We all hold conscious and unconscious attitudes and behaviors towards people who are not like us. We acknowledge white supremacy, patriarchy, classism, heterosexism, capitalism, other forms of bigotry and oppression. We acknowledge that they exist, like religious bigotry, age, ability, language. We acknowledge that systems of oppression exist and are likely to surface from time to time, even in the group that we're in. That's one of the things that I often share is that whether it's a closed virtual space or a closed physical space with doors closed, none of us pass through some barrier that protects us from the marginalization that we experience and that also removes or makes us exempt from the privilege that we benefit from as well. So we all hold conscious and unconscious attitudes and behaviors towards people who are not like us. Systems of oppression exist, they are a real thing, and they are likely to surface in the group, in the space from time to time, because this space that we are establishing is a smaller piece of a larger whole that is still impacted by and influenced by those systems. And it's important to recognize that and bring that into the space so that we're aware of it. And then when those things do surface, we can acknowledge and address them in real time. One of the meanings of power, privilege, and oppression is that we have been systematically taught misinformation about our own groups and especially members of marginalized groups. This is also true for people with privilege as well. So, recognizing that we've been systematically taught information about ourselves. If we're thinking about speaking from and those lived experiences that we have with marginalization, we've been systematically taught misinformation about our own inferiority. and all of the varied messages, the varied ways we've been socialized to believe that we are inferior, thinking about our marginalized identities, it's incorrect, but we're acknowledging that that socialization exists. And we've also been socialized and taught misinformation when it comes to thinking about our privileged identities, and that we've received a lot of misinformation about our superiority in that way, too. And so it's really important to acknowledge the misinformation that we have and acknowledge that that misinformation, that socialization that we experienced in different ways is also existing in the space. And that that socialization, that misinformation, and our impact by it is likely to show up in the space too. Everything that we share is a reflection of experiences that we've had and that we haven't had, of the reflection of the ways we've been socialized and the knowledge that we have up to that point. And in some ways, it's also a reflection of our journeys of trying to resist that misinformation, too. It's one of the reasons why we gather. People who are oppressed will not be blamed for their oppression is a reminder for us that many of the ways that problems are framed often blame people who are marginalized, blame people who are oppressed, blame people who are on the receiving end of oppression for the oppression that they experience. And so saying and acknowledging that people who are oppressed will not be blamed for their oppression is a conscious attempt to resist that dynamic and to shift the focus to systems of oppression and not to the folks who are marginalized. So then we're acknowledging the root causes rather than blaming the folks who are being oppressed for their oppression. We will trust that people are doing the best that they can, both to learn and act in ways that are more humane to one another. So recognizing that even though all of this context exists right now, live in the space in real time, we're still trusting that people are doing the best that they can, both to learn and act in ways that are more humane to each other. And when I'm saying learn and act, that's like learn and take action in ways that are more humane to one another. Recognizing that we're doing the best that we can in this. Okay, so those four acknowledgments are ones that I've found particularly powerful and then also particularly helpful in setting the context when it comes to moving into a conversation around what is it that we need to show up authentically in the space. It's a recognition that we're not all starting at the same places, that we don't all have the same experience or impact with whatever it is that we might be talking about, and a commitment to keeping those things in mind as we move forward. So, in terms of some example community agreements that I've found useful and helpful, here's a non-exhaustive list of some of the ones that resonate with me over time. So, one is be present. And it's an acknowledgement that there may be many things going on in our lives when we're deciding to spend some time together. And to whatever degree that you can, to be present in the moment, depending on what people are sharing, how we respond can really dictate whether a person wants to share more or whether a person will decide, well, hey, based on this response, I'm not saying anything to this group in terms of establishing psychological safety and trust. So to whatever degree possible, the greatest degree possible, to be present, recognizing that things are going on and seeking support when necessary, but definitely being present to the greatest degree that we can. Suspend judgment. So when I learned about this one, it's not designed for us to pretend as if we don't have any judgments. It's recognizing that what we say or share is a reflection of our socialization, a reflection of our experiences. And when we're sharing our experiences with others, once it, comes from our mouths and we share it, as if it's suspended in front of everyone in the space so that we can think about, okay, so what are some of the factors that contributed to what led you to believe this thing, or what contributed to this part of your worldview? What led to that, just to get some more context about where we are, our own learning, and then also to think about our experiences in relation to that. There may be some things that might be similar, there might be some things that are different. It might invite an opportunity for us to think about our relationship with power and privilege and oppression. So it's not to pretend that we don't have any judgments, or to keep those things at the door. It's recognizing actually that we do, and it's putting that at the forefront. The things that we say and share are a reflection of a lot of different experiences and socialization and our relationship to power and privilege. And so when we're sharing, it's providing that opportunity for others to think about an experience in relation to their own, for increased learning, increased connection, increased awareness of the ways we're implicated, and then also some affirmation in that too. Believe in your own capacity and the capacity of others to change with time, experience, or information. Another way I've heard this termed is, don't freeze people in time. This is a recognition that we might say things in a group that, again, are reflective of our socialization, reflective of our awareness or lack thereof, of our privilege. And it's okay to be called on that. It's okay to be called into conversation on that. It's okay in a variety of different ways for others to let us know and to bring that to our attention. And also recognizing that we have the capacity to learn and grow from that. It's not about escaping accountability. It's actually a call to accountability, and recognizing that when pushed, when challenged, when brought into conversation, that we have the capacity to change. This is true for us when we're giving feedback to another based on something that they're missing, that they're not seeing, or that they are doing. And it's also true for us in those moments where it happens to us, depending on our identities and experience and how our knowledge or lack of knowledge is showing up. So just believing that what we do or say in one point in time, we have the capacity to learn and grow from that. We should not be protected from accountability on those things, or shielded from accountability from those things. And we have the capacity to grow and change. Using I statements or speaking from personal experience. This is to avoid generalizations of groups. And it's also in recognition that not everyone has the opportunity to be seen and recognized as an individual because of oppressive dynamics that often put people with marginalized identities in this place of having to be the voice for their groups and communities. Using I statements is an acknowledgement that we're speaking from our own personal experiences, and there is no expectation beyond that. It's a recognition that anyone who is sharing from their own experiences and not a representative of their group, particularly when it comes to folks who are marginalized. Share airtime so all voices can be heard. It's a very important aspect to think about and be aware of, who's speaking, who's not, who's participating, who's not, making sure that there are opportunities for people to communicate in a variety of different ways, some written, some verbal, some nonverbal, creating that space so that everyone has an opportunity to participate and have their narratives, their story, their lived experiences heard. Be mindful of impact as well as intent. Another way I've heard this is impact over everything. One of the quick defensive reactions that sometimes comes up when something's brought to our attention, when we're called into conversation, when we're made aware of our complicity, particularly as it relates to the ways that we're privileged. Sometimes that need awakens to focus on intent. Oh, well, I meant to do, but be mindful of impact as well as intent, or even more so than intent. Or again, as I've heard often, impact over everything. It's really important to recognize that the impact matters much more than what we intended. Accept and honor all emotions you feel. Social justice work is not a clinical experience. Talking about power, privilege, and oppression is not an experience that's removed from emotion and lived experience. It's one of those recognitions that, depending on what we're talking about and our location and relationship to power and privilege, it could be a learning experience for some participants, but it can be life or death. It can be an everyday occurrence. It can be an everyday experience for other participants, depending on where we're located socially in our relationship to power and privilege. So, accepting and honoring all emotions that you feel involves recognizing that we can't remove our emotions from this process. Many folks with marginalized identities are often called upon and tasked with removing emotions and talking about things in a manner that is more digestible, less implicating, more comfortable to people who have privilege in relation to them. And accepting and honoring all emotions that you feel is an explicit move to acknowledge that emotions are real and powerful and valid, and the way forward as well. And it's an attempt to disrupt that pressure, to disrupt those forces that say to folks with marginalized identities that your emotions don't matter. Your emotions aren't welcome here. Your emotions are going to ruin the conversation. They're going to shut people down. And so accepting and honoring all emotions you feel is a really important acknowledgement to resist that dynamic. Practice both and thinking. This one's really recognizing that multiple realities can exist in the same moment, in the same space, at the same time. One example that I often go to is that many of us are privileged in some ways and are also oppressed in other ways, depending on our identities and relationship with power and privilege. Another example that I'll use at times is we can really, really, really want to be on the right side of things. We can really be well intended. And at the very same time, we can really be on the wrong side of things. And despite our intentions, we can really be producing a negative impact with our actions. Okay, so both of those realities can exist in the same space. So practicing both and thinking is an acknowledgement and a way to practice the complexity of social justice work, realizing that multiple realities can exist at the same time. And then lastly, respecting confidentiality, making sure that the specifics that are shared, people's names, lived experiences, lives, there are some things that people trust the group with to share and that they would not like talked about, would not like to be connected to outside of that space. And so, and again, adding power and privilege in the dynamic of this group sharing, there are some folks for whom telling the truth comes at a great risk and a great cost. And so it's really important to recognize and honor the things that are learned, but then also to not share a story that's not your story to tell. Respecting confidentiality, it's about not sharing stories that aren't your stories to tell. Community agreements should be designed with liberation in mind, with the questions of what needs to be here for us to take off the masks that we wear. What needs to be present for us to lower our defenses, to reduce the amount of weight we carry on a daily basis, to acknowledge any fear that might be present, and yet to work through that fear together. Community agreements are meant to be liberatory. Thanks again for choosing the Notes from an Aspiring Humanitarian podcast. I look forward to engaging with you in the next episode. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure to leave a review and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. To find show notes for this and additional episodes, visit podcast.notesfromanaspiringhumanitarian.com. Notes from an Aspiring Humanitarian is a labor of love and will continue to be. Consider supporting the work of Notes from an Aspiring Humanitarian by becoming a monthly patron. Your contributions will help keep this resource alive and support its mission. Visit patreon.com/NAHblog to learn more and make a contribution of $3, $5, $10, or $20 per month. Again, that's patreon.com/NAHblog. You can start or stop anytime. Thank you for joining me this week. Take care.